Silent Descent Cave Incident. On September 30th, 2016, Luke Nelson was excited about exploring a cave in the Texas wilderness. Luke had explored countless caves before and wasn't afraid of risky adventures. The cave was known by locals as Silent Descent. It was a complex system of tunnels, many of which had never been fully mapped. One area had gained a reputation for being dangerous, an unmapped section called the Deadman's Tunnel. Luke knew about this section, but curiosity got the best of him. He packed his gear, checked his map, and told his sister he was heading out for a quick cave dive. What he didn't tell her was that he planned to go alone. Earlier that morning, Luke had called his friend, hoping to convince him to join. His friend had other plans and warned Luke about the dangers of caving alone, but Luke brushed off the concern. The entrance to the cave was about a 2-hour hike from the nearest road. Luke had walked the path before. As he neared the cave's mouth, he took a deep breath and entered. After hours of navigating through narrow passages and slippery rock formations, Luke reached a junction that wasn't on his map. A new, unexplored route branched off to the left while the main path went to the right. He hesitated, but the desire to explore the unknown was too strong. He went left, convinced that this new route might hold the thrill he was after. The passage was tight, much narrower than he expected. As he squeezed through, the walls began to close in around him. The ceiling lowered, forcing him to crouch, and soon he was crawling on his stomach. Several feet in, Luke realized his mistake. He tried to back up, but the walls pressed against his body, locking him in place. His chest felt tight as he realized he was stuck. He had taken the wrong route, a path too narrow for a full-grown man. Panic surged through him as he tried to free himself, but the rock seemed to tighten its grip. The narrow passage left him little room to expand his chest fully. The air felt stale and suffocating. Fear gripped him. He shouted for help, though he knew he was alone. There was no one to hear him, no one to rescue him. Hours later, when Luke hadn't returned, his sister began to worry. She called Luke's friend, who was immediately alarmed when he learned that Luke had gone into the cave alone. He alerted local authorities, and soon a rescue team was mobilized. When the rescuers arrived, they could see signs that someone had recently entered the cave. Hours passed with no sign of Luke. Then a rescuer spotted something. A small carabiner, likely dropped by Luke, lay near the entrance to the unmapped section. It was clear Luke had gone off the planned route and taken the dangerous path. The rescue crew knew that exploring this uncharted area was risky, but it was their only chance of finding Luke. One of the rescuers, small enough to fit through the tight passage, volunteered to go in. With a rope securely tied around him, the team carefully lowered him into the narrow tunnel. The passage twisted and turned, tightening in places. Then, in the dim light, he saw Luke, wedged deep in the passage but alive. His helmet had been knocked off and his arms were pinned awkwardly beneath him. Luke was overjoyed when he heard the rescuer. Although exhausted, this gave him the will to fight more. The rescuers signaled to the team and they got into action. First, they used a portable stove to produce heat to keep Luke warm. The plan was to widen the gap, set up a pulley system, and pull him out with extreme care. They spent hours chiseling away rock, careful not to cause a collapse. Once the gap was wide enough, they set up a pulley system. A rescuer was lowered in and secured a rope around Luke's body. Slowly, the team worked together, pulling him through the tight space. After a tense and exhausting effort, they finally brought Luke out. Deadman's Cave Incident. On April 30th, 2007, Thomas Summers and his friend Brent Holbrook went to Deadman's Cave in Texas. Recent rains had raised the water levels in Deadman's Cave, blocking access to areas where cavers often explored. Their goal was to find and clear any blockages that might be stopping the cave's water flow. By 2 p.m., the two men had gone about 300 feet into the cave. The passage got narrower and the ceiling got lower to just a few inches of airspace. They had no helmets to protect them. Thomas was determined to keep going and swam ahead. Brent hesitated, realizing the risk was too high to continue. As Thomas swam further into Deadman's Cave, the passage grew tighter. The ceiling dropped, leaving just a few inches of airspace between the cold water and the rough stone above. The water was slowly rising from the recent rains. The air pocket he relied on grew dangerously narrow. Thomas kept his head as close to the surface as possible, desperately trying to find the few inches of air left. At first, he breathed carefully, keeping his face above the waterline. But as he moved deeper, the air began to feel stale and thick. The cave's atmosphere was already low on a fresh oxygen. It started to fill with carbon dioxide from his own breathing. Each breath he took brought in less oxygen and more of the suffocating gas. His chest grew tighter, his breaths shorter, and panic began to take over. He realized that the air pocket wasn't getting fresh air fast enough. Thomas felt lightheaded and dizzy as if the cave was spinning around him. The stale, oxygen-starved air filled his lungs, but it wasn't enough. Disoriented and gasping, Thomas's energy drained as the water reached his chin. His body gave out before he could make it back. In the dark, cold waters of Deadman's Cave, he slipped beneath the surface. He was unable to fight the pull of the water any longer. Brent swam a few feet behind Thomas, his heart pounding as the passage grew tighter. He called out, but only heard the sputtering of Thomas's breath echoing through the cave. Then there was only silence, no response, no movement. Panic surged as Brent shouted again, but the cave swallowed his voice. Realizing something had gone terribly wrong, Brent knew he had to turn back for help. Within hours, a rescue team arrived. The rescue crews worked tirelessly to lower the water level using powerful pumps. They hoped to clear the flooded passage before it was too late. Hours passed. The rescue teams knew they were in a race against time. By nightfall, the water levels had dropped just enough for cave divers to enter the flooded tunnel. Jean Kreka and Linda Pollitt carefully navigated the narrow, suffocating passage. Even a slight mistake could prove fatal for them. They had to rely on their training and instincts as they searched the dark waters for any sign of Thomas. After hours of careful work, John and Linda finally found his body. He was submerged in the tight air pocket where he had struggled. By 9 p.m., the rescuers emerged from the cave carrying Thomas's lifeless body. Jenolan Cave Incident. On March 30th, 2024, 6 cavers arrived at the Jenolan Caves for a self-guided tour. The group was familiar with the cave system, but not the specific section they planned to explore that day. After gearing up, they began their journey. For nearly 4 hours, the group squeezed through tight tunnels and obstacles. They were heading toward a section known as the Row Hole, which would be the final and most challenging part of the day. The first 4 members of the group managed to work their way through, but Tim and Eliza, the last 2, were still behind. Tim went first, carefully inching his way into the narrow tunnel. The passage became very tight as they advanced. It was the most difficult squeeze they had ever experienced. As Tim moved forward on his elbows with his shoulders squeezed in, he found a bend just before the tunnel turned almost completely vertical. This required some twisting to get through, but as Tim tried to twist his body to fit the curve, he suddenly became stuck. A sharp rock sticking out from the tunnel wall pinned him in place, trapping him. He couldn't move forward or backward. Eliza, waiting behind him, was also trapped, as this was the only exit nearby. More concerning was Tim's position, like he was nearly upside down, which is extremely dangerous. Being stuck in this position puts extra strain on the heart, which must work harder to pump blood throughout the body. When Tim realized he couldn't free himself, he called for help, but none of the others who had already passed through the tight passage could return to help. At 7:20 p.m., a call was made to emergency services. Rescuers rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, the rescue leader knew this would be a difficult mission due to the tight space and Tim's upside-down position. The leader determined that the only way to free Tim was to chip away at the rock that had him trapped. Entering the cave head first, the rescue leader carefully worked his way into the tight space beneath Tim. Armed with a drill, he began making small holes in the rock. Dust and debris sprayed into both his and Tim's faces. After drilling, he pulled out a chisel and told Tim to stay as still as possible. For nearly 10 hours, the rescue leader worked tirelessly in the cramped, dark tunnel. He chipped away at the rock, bit by bit. Finally, at 4:45 a.m. on Easter Sunday, Tim was freed and able to crawl out of the narrow passage. Eliza followed shortly after. Both walked out of the Jenolan Caves shaken but unharmed. Schroeder's Pants Cave Incident. On Saturday, February 13th, 1965, 3 friends went caving together. James Mitchell was 23 years old and worked as a scientist. His friends Hugh and Charles Bennett came with him. They wanted to explore Schroeder's Pants Cave in Dogville. First, they went to visit George Lyon, who owned the land above the cave. George was not home to warn them about the dangers. Cold, melting snow was creating fast-flowing water in the cave. They felt confident and entered the cave entrance. Inside the cave, they crawled through tight spots. Finally, they reached a big chamber with a deep hole. The hole was a vertical shaft that went down 80 feet. James decided he wanted to explore deeper into the cave. He put on a safety harness and tied a rope around himself. James lowered himself down into the deep shaft. As he went down, he met a waterfall of freezing cold water. The water was minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The deeper James went, the stronger the waterfall became. Suddenly, James's rope got stuck and trapped his arm. He was hanging in the shaft with ice-cold water pouring over him. James could not move his arm or climb back up. Even though he was in trouble, James tried to stay calm. He told his friends that he would be okay. Hugh and Charles were only 10 feet above James. They tried desperately to pull him up. For 45 minutes, they struggled to save their friend, but they could not pull him up against the icy water. Charles realized they needed help. He climbed out of the cave to find rescue workers. The closest cave rescue team was in Washington, D.C. They had to fly to the cave to help, but by the time the rescue team arrived, it was too late. James had died from hypothermia. Cave walls started to collapse. Rocks and boulders blocked the way. The rescuers were worried the cave might collapse completely. They could get trapped inside too. Finally, they had to seal up the cave. This turned the cave into James's tomb. In 2006, something amazing happened. Christian Lyon was George Lyon's grandson. Christian had grown up hearing about James's death. He did not think it was right to leave James's body in the cave. Christian decided to recover James's remains. Christian put together a team of expert cavers. Christian and his team went back into the dangerous cave. The passages were still collapsed and treacherous. Christian went down the same vertical shaft where James had died. He faced the same icy waterfall that had killed James. Finally, at 75 feet deep, he found James's bones. Christian felt many emotions when he found James. After 41 years, James's remains were brought out of the cave. James was given a proper burial. MegaWell Cave Incident. On January 13, 1991, 3 cavers went to explore MegaWell Cave in Alabama. John Mossey was the leader and had 10 years of caving experience. Linda O'Donnell and Charles Daffinger were newer cavers. Charles was 26 years old and weighed 240 pounds. He was very excited about caving and wanted to try harder caves. The plan was to go down a 310-foot deep pit in the cave. It had been raining recently, so water was flowing into the cave. The water made everything wet and slippery. John brought a rope. They set up the rope at the entrance to the pit. The rope had to go over a sharp rock ledge 20 feet down. This rock had deep grooves from other ropes rubbing against it. John went down the rope first and reached the bottom safely. Linda went down second and also made it to the bottom. Charles went down last. All 3 cavers spent 45 minutes exploring the cave at the bottom. The cave was huge but very cold and wet. Linda was shivering from the cold water. John decided it was time to climb back up. John climbed up first and reached the top safely. Linda climbed up second and also made it out. She was very cold, so John told her to wait in the car to get warm. Charles started climbing up the rope last. John waited at the top of the pit and called down to check on Charles. After 20 minutes, John could not hear Charles answering. John grabbed the rope to check if Charles was still on it. The rope felt loose and had no weight on it. John pulled the rope up and saw that it was broken. The rope had snapped somewhere during Charles's climb. John realized that Charles had fallen 310 feet to the bottom. John was very scared and ran to tell Linda what happened. They immediately went to find help. A man promised to call for rescuers. John got more ropes and went back to the cave. Linda waited outside to guide the rescuers. John went back down into the cave with new ropes. When John reached the bottom, he found Charles. Charles had died from the fall. His helmet was broken and his body was badly hurt. John wrapped Charles in a sleeping bag. John climbed back up to tell the rescuers. The rescue team worked all night to bring Charles's body out. Uncharted Cave Incident. Benjamin Miller and 2 friends decided to explore an uncharted cave. The cave was known by only a few people. It was famous for having very tight, awkwardly angled passages. The passages created a maze of stone. As they went deeper into the cave, they had to squeeze through narrow openings. They crawled on their bellies through some parts. The air was thin and hard to breathe. The cold stone walls made them feel very cold. Benjamin was leading the group. He spotted what looked like an opening ahead. The opening seemed to lead to a wider space. Benjamin was excited about reaching a larger chamber. He called out to his friends about the bigger space ahead. Without waiting for their opinion, Benjamin started to squeeze through the narrow opening. But as he pushed himself further in, the passage got much narrower. The passage curved sharply in a dangerous way. Before Benjamin realized it, he was completely stuck. Panic took over as he tried to pull himself back. The rock held him tightly, pressing against his chest and back. His friends hurried to help him. They squeezed through the tight tunnel to reach Benjamin. Every time they tried to pull him free, the stone seemed to grip him tighter. They pulled and pushed, but nothing worked. Benjamin's body was twisted in an unnatural way. The friends realized this was a very serious situation. One of them squeezed back through the passage to the surface. He frantically called for rescue teams. The minutes felt like hours as they waited in the cold, dark cave. Benjamin's breathing became more difficult. His face was pale and covered in sweat. When the rescue team finally arrived, they quickly looked at the situation. They knew this would be a very challenging rescue. The cave was too narrow to use heavy machinery. The rescuers had to use chisels to break the rock. They also set up a pulley system to try to pull Benjamin out. As hours passed, Benjamin's condition got worse. The tight passage pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. The coldness of the cave began to hurt Benjamin. His body temperature dropped dangerously low. He started to shiver uncontrollably. As more hours passed, the situation became desperate. Benjamin was in terrible pain. The rescuers chiseled at the rock and adjusted the pulley system, but the narrow passage would not give way. Benjamin's body had reached its limit. Finally, the rescuers were able to widen the gap enough to free Benjamin. The rescuers took him out and rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, Benjamin passed away.